Hello and welcome to today's webinar, ERP or Best of Breed Software, What's Right for Me, presented by Ciphr in association with independent HR and payroll technology experts, Phase 3. Ciphr is a specialist provider of SaaS HR, payroll, recruitment and learning software through our HCM platform, Ciphr Connect. Ciphr Connect is designed to provide a frictionless people experience across an organization's entire employee lifecycle. It also enables seamless integration, not only with Ciphr's own solutions, but also to an ecosystem of specialist third-party tools using our modern API technology. I'm Catherine Newbury and I'm Ciphr's Head of Content and Community. With me today is James Proctor, Director of Consulting and Services at Independent HR and Payroll Technology Consultancy Phase 3. Welcome, James. It's great to have you with us today. Could you tell us a little bit more about your experiences with HR technology?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So I started my career in the public sector using SAP, which was a bit of a baptism of fire into HRIS. And since then, I've worked in HR and payroll leadership roles, and I moved to Phase 3 about 6 years ago to help clients with the selection, implementation, and development of a range of HR and payroll solutions. And one of the things that we're really keen on at Phase 3 is sharing knowledge, so I'm really happy to join you today on this session.
Brilliant, thanks so much, James. It's great to have you with us as always. So we're just going to have a quick look at today's agenda. First, we're going to look at the key differences between ERP and best of breed HR solutions, and also at the pros and cons of each type of solution. James will also guide you through the factors that will help you decide which option is right for your organisation and how to make your final choice of HR technology provider. We want to make this broadcast as interactive and as useful for you as possible, so if you have any questions for James at any time, just send them in using the Q&A box on your screen. If you're watching live, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you tomorrow, that's the 18th of September. Okay, we're going to start off today's broadcast with our first poll. How would you describe your current people technology situation? Are you actively looking for a new solution? Have you had your solution for a while and are happy with it? Or have you had your solution for a while and aren't happy with it? So James, you work with a range of organisations. How satisfied are they, generally speaking, with their existing HR solutions?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there are 2 points really. I think that firstly, many organisations buy and implement their technology, but then go back to the business as usual and fall into the trap of not investing and developing in the tool, which can lead to a bit of a frustration and lack of trust in the system. We've done a white paper previously together and we talked about benchmarking technology, and I think that's something that should be done regularly. And I also recommend sort of thinking of your technology as a car. You need to put petrol in the engine and you need to have an annual MOT to make sure it's doing what it should. And another point I would say is that a lot of people do love the technology that they have, but it's not necessarily the best fit. And we all know we feel comfortable with what we know, but I would always challenge HR and payroll professionals to sort of go out there and see what's on offer from other solutions and compare costs and benefits, just so you stay in the head of the curve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we take it back to that car analogy, it's like you might have loved that fun little hatchback when you were younger, but at some point you might have to upgrade to a family car if it's no longer suitable for your needs. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results now. So 73% of you on the call today say that you're actively looking for new solutions, and 27% of you say that you have had your solution for a while and aren't happy with it. And none of you say that you're happy with your current solution. So I guess everybody here is in the market for some expertise and some guidance on picking a new one today. So that's great that you're all roughly on the same page.
And clearly not a Ciphr customer.
Yeah, well, we hope not. So James, can you start by telling us a little more about the factors that would influence an organisation to opt for an enterprise resource planning system, so that's what we mean by ERP, or a best of breed HCM solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I would consider is the size and complexity of the organisation setup. So ERP providers are traditionally those that would service enterprise-sized clients, so in the many thousands of employees, although some do now have sort of light or agile versions of their technology, which are aimed at the smaller customers. So there is a bit more choice with those vendors, and as I say, size isn't everything, and complexity of the organisation does play a key role. So for example, you might be a small UK entity, but you're part of a global business. or if you've got sort of relatively low employee numbers or permanent staff, but you might rely on a large gig economy or have high level of casual workers. So the size and the complexity does come into account there. And if you are the sort of UK arm of a larger business, you might be in that unusual position of having an ERP solution, even though you're not enterprise size in the UK. And that can be a bit of an issue if budgeting for systems is devolved to each country, because the cost of configuring and making changes to sort of ERP solutions can be quite high. And it's not uncommon these days to have in-country best of breed solutions and then using something like a data aggregator to share the data globally. And from an organisational process perspective, we want to consider what kind of organisation you are. So, for example, a manufacturing organisation would have a very different requirement to the likes of Ciphr or Phase 3, for example, with service organisations. Do we need to think about things like productivity in terms of billable hours as a service organisation, or are we talking about the number of widgets that you produce? And particularly, what other systems do we need to integrate with? So that systems map is really important to think about. If you've currently got a lot of separate systems such as HR, payroll, learning, recruitment, finance, CRM for customers and marketing, and then another platform for sales, and if none of those are connected or integrated, that might be an issue for the organisation and why you might be looking for new technology. And we also want to consider the factors such as how complex those system setups have been, how bespoke they are, or if you've had a heavily customized or even an in-premise system built in-house. It's really important to understand how you would be able to move away from those products, but also the length of the contracts that you've got with the supplier before you consider the move, and how long that new implementation process might take. And from a system functionality perspective, we want to look out for those really niche requirements that you have and consider what the scope of the whole project looks like. So are you looking for only HR, for example, or only payroll, or HR and payroll with a bit of finance, but you don't want to include procurement? So really at the outset, be really clear on what you need and ensure that the scope and the direction of your selection is detailed enough to be able to come up with a shortlist. And one thing I always sort of think about is, in terms of best of breed suppliers, they're really likely to have a crystal clear focus on the subject matter that the technology supports. So their research and development investment will be in one specific area of expertise, and their team will generally all be specialists in the application of that technology. So if we're talking about recruitment, we would probably have all of our research and development into recruitment and onboarding. We wouldn't be sort of part of a bigger picture there.
Okay, so we've had a look at the type of factors that might influence your decision about the type of HR software that's right for your organisation. But I think we need to go a little bit deeper into the specifics of each type of solution. So James, can you take me through what exactly is an ERP software and what functions or features it might typically include?
Yeah, so we've got some examples on the screen there, but to give you the definition, as it were, enterprise resource planning, ERP, is defined as the ability to deliver an integrated suite of business applications. So they're normally tools that share a common process and a common data model, and they cover broad and deep operational end-to-end processes, such as those found in finance, HR, distribution, manufacturing, and supply chain. So that's the technical term out of the way. So to deep down a little bit more into what they mean. So from HR, that would cover things like the core HR records, recruitment, retention, talent management, organisation charting, and case management. Finance would cover the full finance services for suppliers, customers, stock control, accounting, and payments. Payroll, obviously full end-to-end payroll, all of the payroll, pensions and RTI functionality you would expect. From a procurement perspective, it'd be supply chain management and then supplier and contract management as well. Sales would be looking at the pipeline, the deals, the customer records and orders that have been made and backlog of orders. And from a CRM perspective, that's customer relationship management. That would be supporting the customer support functions with web portals and sort of help areas and knowledge bases, those kind of things. And from a risk management perspective, it would be the risk register, risk logging and risk mitigation. And you might find that they include other features such as facilities management, resource management and timekeeping, time and attendance kind of functionality, internal help desks and ticketing, and marketing applications. And I think in the context of HR and payroll, you can see that's only one small part of it. So I think if we bring that to life in a little bit more context, so in terms of ERP software, I'm going to use the example of a retail organisation. So if we're a large retail organisation with many hundreds of thousands of employees across the globe, they will have people records, the payroll records, details about stock management, distribution and warehouse management, e-commerce maybe from website sales, the actual sales data from the tills and POS in real time, and a pipeline of stock based on what we've purchased. And we'd have our marketing team pushing certain items, especially those with high stock levels. And an ERP solution would have all of that data sat in one single solution. And that means that we can easily look at things like sales per person and how that correlates to their pay, and the performance of marketing and the impact on sales, and whether that's online or in store. And the true business costs and daily revenue generation across the whole company versus staffing levels on that day. So it's all in a single database with a single sign-on and a single user interface.
Great. So what are the advantages of using an ERP?
Okay, so I suppose, as I mentioned, user experience, having that one single platform and that one single user interface does make life easier. So in that example, if I'm a manager in one of the stores, I could see all of my people data, my payrolls, my sales, my stock, all through that one system and all with one user interface, which means I'm not logging into multiple systems all the time and having to work out how to use different systems. And that's linked with single sign-on. So I've got one password as a user, but there'll be some really complex security settings behind the scenes that say what I can see and what I can't see. And that gets me access to everything that I need to do as an employee. In terms of suppliers, with an ERP, you're only going to have one potentially. And I would say I've listed this in advantages and disadvantages, but the advantage of the one supplier would be sort of more of a partnership approach if you're investing in your entire business being managed by that one product. There would be reduced contract management for a single contract, and obviously one invoice for all of the business systems. From an integration perspective, in a true ERP, there wouldn't really be that many integrations because everything exists in that one system and that one database. So for example, in our context, when payroll is run, you wouldn't have to run an interface for the general ledger for finance. It's all in the same system, and finance would simply post the records into the financial functions. So I think at this stage I'd say a word of caution because I'm talking true ERP here. What I mean by that is a product which has been designed and developed as an ERP, rather than some solutions which have sort of been built as a finance system, and then the company have bought out a HR product and a marketing product, for example, and over time have sort of stitched these systems together, and not really a true ERP solution. So it's just a word of caveat there. And I think the single database is the biggest single advantage, particularly for reporting. The data set would all be in one format, one reporting solution, and you could do cross-functional reporting really easily. So when we talk about people analytics and that data maturity in terms of whether you're looking at reporting or insights or predictive analytics, it would be much easier to have people analytics quite quickly for an organization. And that might involve comparing, for example, those employee performance versus sales data, or looking at the net promoter score from a customer perspective versus how much that member of staff is paid.
But of course, as with any decision, there's always there's challenges associated with picking an ERP provider, aren't there?
Yes, absolutely. So first thing I would say is in terms of size, obviously that is the biggest challenge. If you are a very small business, an ERP is likely to be out of reach for you. But the biggest single challenge to ERP is open integration, and that's a threat to ERP because open integration between multiple systems with real-time API data sharing means that there are a number of challenges in the marketplace, and ERP systems traditionally don't play well with other solutions outside of their own family, and this is a limitation because the expectation is that you use all of the functionality in that one system. So if you find that one functional area of that solution is a little bit lacking and you wanted to purchase a best of breed solution for just that one business function, it could be quite difficult to integrate that solution. And that's the flip side of the fact that integration in theory is much easier overall. And another key consideration is the cost versus the benefits. So ERP, as you would imagine, is renowned for being expensive, not just to purchase, but to implement and to maintain. And they're generally highly customized for each business, and consultancy can be really expensive because you've got a lengthy transformational project. And I say transformational project because if you're implementing ERP, it's not just like implementing a HR system or a payroll system. You're literally implementing a solution which manages the whole business, which is, in a larger company, is obviously a massive project to undertake. And I think if you decide that you want to move away from your ERP, if you already have one, then that decoupling process can be really complicated. So, for example, if you want to take payroll first into a new system, because the payroll is the part of the solution that you're less impressed with, then that would have an impact on the finance module within that solution and the HR module, and they might need to be reconfigured to not have the payroll data sat in the system, and that general ledger we mentioned earlier would then need to be integrated into the system. And as we said, integration isn't necessarily something that fits well with ERP solutions. And from an implementation perspective, your lead times and implementation timescale is going to be significantly longer. So as I mentioned, it's going to be a transformative project. If we think about parallel runs, they're going to be happening in almost every department. And to go big bang on this kind of project would have a massive lead time and a massive resource implication, and the consultancy cost would probably be quite phenomenal. So the longer lead time and the longer implementation time scale might be anywhere between sort of 18 months to 5 years, depending on the size of the organisation. And for this scale of that project and the overall scope, the sequencing is going to be key in terms of which departments move on to the solution first and what impact there is on those parallel runs. And comms and engagement across the whole business is going to be absolutely critical. And you're going to need a really strong project management team to manage that project. And I mentioned supplier management in the advantages and said it could also be a disadvantage. And the key question here is what would happen if finance and sales love the solution, but HR and payroll hate it and the employees hate it? The relationship management with the supplier is going to be quite complex, and probably lots of people from the same supplier would have different interests. So you'd probably have an account manager for HR, for finance, for payroll, and they might interact with the customer in a very different way. And there's going to be an upfront cost when the product isn't yet in use, because usually you would start paying from day one of the contract, not from the go live date. So consider that there are going to be potentially long lead times where you're paying for a solution that you're still parallel running and not potentially using. And if we think about the business stakeholders and the relationships, there's going to be lots of stakeholders in the business that have a vested interest in that relationship with the supplier and will want to be involved. And the final thing to consider is around research and development from that supplier. It's likely to be spread in terms of investment across the whole suite of the solution rather than one focused area. So there would be a significant impact then in terms of people and resource costs, both internally and externally from the supplier support.
So lots to consider there if you're thinking an ERP might be right for you. There's a lot of factors to consider. So we're now going to take a look at the other option on the market, which is best of breed software. What does that term mean, James, and what are the implications of opting for this rather than an ERP?
Yeah, so a definition again. So best of breed, or best in class as it's sometimes known, is any item or product which is considered to be the best of its kind for that specific function. And as we're on a Ciphr webinar, we'll use Ciphr as an example. Ciphr is a best in breed HR recruitment and learning product. So best in breed or best of breed suppliers are niche providers, and they focus solely on one particular area of business. So in our world, we're talking HR and payroll. And that could be broken down even further to a more granular level, in that we might have different solutions and providers for our applicant tracking and recruitment, case management, performance management, our core HR records, organisation charting, payroll, and then our LMS system for e-learning and hosting. And that could mean that ultimately we have quite a few different providers, or we have a specialist provider that covers a few of those functions, but we might have specialist providers for every single one of those areas. So the key challenge for those providers and for the customers is going to be integrating with other solutions. So I think it's relevant to say now that, of course, best of breed providers, knowing that that's what they are, will build their products on the basis that they absolutely have to integrate with other best-in-breed providers. And more commonly, we're seeing sort of best-of-breed providers join together in a partner ecosystem so that they can provide complementary products, to their customers. Okay, so here is a sort of real-life example of best-in-breed software. So this is quite a simple example, but it's the systems map for an organisation with best-in-breed solutions. So quite simple and focusing on HR and payroll. So we've got a specialist HR solution, a specialist payroll solution, a recruitment solution, and a learning solution. And alongside all of that is the integration route. So if we think about this from a best-in-breed approach, the recruitment system would integrate into HR. So once a new hire has been selected and onboarding, the data would be passed into the HR solution. And once that's been approved, and we might add some terms and conditions and contractual hours, for example, we might pass that data then from recruitment and onboarding through to payroll. And that might include the new hire's personal details, their bank accounts, new starter declaration and pension preferences, those kind of things. Payroll might then pass data back into HR when they've been paid, for example, and to give the total figures. And as part of the onboarding process, the new hire might be required to do some e-learning, and the integration might allow for the new hire to complete some pre-boarding learning. And through their probationary period, the learning system might be sending them reminders about their other mandatory learning that they need to do. And that might be pushing data back into the HR system in terms of match and gap when people have actually done their mandatory training. And the learning solution might also pass back through to recruitment any skills gaps or shortages in the organisation, so that the recruitment team can then target key individuals with those skills. So what we've ended up with really is the best of all solutions, which operate completely separately but are completely integrated and passing data back and forth through an integration hub or APIs.
Great. And one of the things you mentioned to look for with a best-of-breed supplier is that they might be working with an ecosystem or marketplace of partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm going to bring this live using the Ciphr example, really. So I took this screenshot from the Ciphr partner portal. And so this is Ciphr's partner ecosystem. So Ciphr is the best-in-breed HR, payroll, learning, and recruitment solution. But Ciphr recognise that they want to give customers a choice. And that they aren't necessarily specialists in all areas. So Ciphr allow their customers to integrate, for example, with Moodle for e-learning hosting, or DocuSign if you want document management signing. If you wanted to implement pay on demand for employees, then you could integrate with WageStream. And for employee perks and benefits, you might want to choose Perkbox. And for expenses, you might want to integrate with web expenses. So there are two things there, really. One, Ciphr as a platform might already deliver those solutions, but they give the customers choice and they have open integrations, or they might recognize that actually it's not their areas of expertise, so they partner with other organizations to be able to do that. And I think I mentioned this to you before, Catherine, but it struck me walking around the Festival of Work in London back in the days when we were allowed to go to such events, that in the innovation arena, there were lots of new niche products being developed, and almost every one of them had a sign that said integrates with Ciphr. And I think that's really showcasing the partner ecosystem to its fullest extent.
Yeah, it's definitely something we're really keen with here at Ciphr, is to work with partners that we've known and trusted for some time, but also if there is software that you already use that you like but we haven't been introduced to them, then that's something that we can look to integrate with too. So it's all about that openness and willing to work with other providers, which you wouldn't necessarily get with an ERP. So James, can you take us through some other advantages of choosing a best of breed HR software?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, we would expect best in breed to be functionality rich. So because the solutions have just that one purpose, the time and effort of the supplier is spent on perfecting that customer experience, engaging with customers and creating as much choice as possible for customers. And because it's that supplier's particular area of interest, the research and development focus in that particular area is going to be really targeted. And from a user experience, the consultants and help desks that you're provided with will be really well versed in supporting customer queries, and they'll probably really understand legislation. So for example, if we're talking about payroll, the payroll provider's help desk, we would expect to have payroll legislation knowledge. It would be their area of expertise. And they're likely to have employed or engaged with experts in that particular field to stay on the cutting edge, or have regular consultations with the marketplace. Specialty products also react to the changing landscape quickly, And we were going to have to mention it at some point, but I think if we talk about COVID-19 and furlough, HR and payroll solution providers sort of instantly recognised that this was going to be a massive headache for customers. Systems were updated with new legislation that was changing rapidly. They developed solutions to calculate things like furlough payments and adapted processes so that systems could handle much heavier loads of transactions, as well as everybody trying to log in on payday to understand what their furlough pay actually looked like. And the suppliers, because they were in that HR and payroll arena, were publishing guidance on how to best use their product to support all these new processes that everybody found themselves doing. And I think it's a key question really to think on at this point. Did your system help or hinder during this process? And if the answer is hinder, then it's probably something that you would want to investigate further. And I mentioned the ecosystem, and the main advantage that you have here is the choice. So best of breed providers, even those who have special functionality, still allow you to use that functionality and not to use the functionality if you don't want to, and have another best of breed products instead. So these systems are all built on the basis of open integration. So they recognize that they need to be able to integrate with other solutions, and therefore they're well practiced in actually delivering those integrations with multiple other providers. And that makes it easier to switch in and out products with each. So the decoupling process is a lot simpler if you're only taking away one small part of the whole system map. And I think especially in smaller and more agile and rapidly developing organizations, that's a really big advantage, because often we find that we've outgrown our solutions quite quickly if we weren't expecting things to go as well as they did, for example.
Yeah, so there are lots of advantages to a best of breed software, and Ciphr is a big advocate of this approach, but we've got to be realistic with you. There are challenges associated with choosing this type of solution too. James, can you just chat us through these points on the screen now?
Yeah, so challenges, there will always be challenges in any project, I suppose. Integration and disconnection were some of the advantages, but also the disadvantages. So there is an integration overhead now, and a headache, I suppose, in terms of setting up and maintaining those integrations, which you wouldn't necessarily have with an ERP. But if you've got, for example, some combinations of SaaS or cloud-hosted solutions, there is a caveat to that although the system suppliers are used to creating those integrations, it's still something that we need to consider, and potentially there's an extra cost when we're looking at implementing the software. And one of the questions that you want to be asking that potential supplier is, how well do you integrate with other solutions? And if you already have some solutions that are in place in the organization, how well do they integrate with your chosen solutions that you've already got? There can be a challenge on two-way integration. For example, we might take data out of HR and into payroll, but do we ever pass it back? And a real-life example of that is if you're looking at gender pay reporting, would you have to pull a report out of HR system and a report out of the payroll system, or could you have that combined data in one solution? So can payroll pass data back into the HR solution about what's actually being paid after all the calculations have been done? Again, multiple vendors, it can be a good thing or a bad thing. With best in breed, you're going to have more suppliers, but it might also mean that rather than contract management sitting at one level, you could then devolve that to your centres of excellence within HR and payroll. So your recruitment manager, for example, would look after the recruitment system, and the payroll manager after the payroll system. So rather than that being managed at a corporate level, you can align the team internally and the specialists with the specialist provider, which you can then turn into an advantage, I suppose. And the cost to purchase overall is going to be a watch point. I mean, in terms of niche systems, there could potentially be an extra cost in terms of setting them up. And you might see that because you're purchasing lots of smaller systems rather than one massive one, that you don't get the same level of economies of scale that you would expect from an ERP.
Okay, great. So there's lots of questions that come up when organisations are considering which HR software to invest in. One that many struggle with is integrating various applications simpler if I opt for a single ERP provider rather than a best of breed vendor. What's your perspective on this, James?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things to consider. So first of all, in terms of integrated solutions, if we look at integrated solutions that are in the marketplace, a fully integrated HRIS and payroll solution is different to a best in breed solution potentially. So really consider the level of functionality that you want. And when we're talking about those integrated solutions, they might have a bit of finance added in as well. But I always suggest look at the history of the product. So are they sort of truly integrated, or over 20 years have 15 different companies been acquired that then make up one system, and over the years they've been stitched together? So has the system really been built as an integrated solution or not? And I think you'll find that in the majority of cases where that is the case, and those solution providers are selling that as an integrated solution, actually it's not. And we want solution providers to be really honest about the fact that they have a HR solution, a payroll solution, a recruitment solution, for example. If they are separate, understand why they are, and they probably are separate because they're best in breed. And we want to understand whether or not there is a single database, or whether we've got multiple databases doing lots of pushing and pulling of data here, there and everywhere. And the impact on that is obviously on reporting. And we have to ask, is the data already joined in those tables, which is getting quite technical, or do we have to go through some kind of joining process to be able to link together the employee record across the different solutions that they have? And I've already mentioned hosting, but hosting is another implication to consider. If you don't have access to the back end of the solution, for example, because it's hosted by the supplier, are you then limited in reporting? Or is there an inbuilt reporting tool, and does that have any limitations? Can you access every field within the database, essentially? And a more common approach these days is having integrated business systems integrated through some kind of data warehouse. So it could be that all the systems have a data extract on a regular basis. There might be some kind of transformation of that data to change formats to make it more consistent. And then the user can then access or pull reports from, or access dashboards from that area once it's being transformed. And I suppose the key here really is to answer the question, is best of breed products, they are built on that foundation of knowing that they need to integrate, whereas ERP would already be integrated. So the choice really is yours in terms of those solutions.
Okay, great. We're just going to take a little bit of a breather from the death by PowerPoint for our second poll here. Based on the things that we've been discussing around integrations, do you believe that the HR and L&D solutions in place at your organisation at the moment are fully integrated? Just give us a quick yes or no answer, true or false on that. James, from your experience, what do you kind of expect our audience might say? Do you find that organisations think that their systems are fully integrated when actually they're not really?
Yeah, I mean, judging by the poll we had earlier on in the session where a lot of people weren't impressed with their technology, I would imagine we're going to see that the majority of the audience will say no. It's a maturity journey in terms of HR and payroll and the rest of business systems. And I think a lot of people are still on that early stage of the integrated solutions and the reporting advantages that brings out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. So 92% of our audience today don't believe that their solutions in their organisation are fully integrated, and just 8% of you say that that statement is true for you. So good job to the 8%. Well done. We're going to have a look at now at comparing types of systems. Is it, when we're looking at comparing, say, a solution from an ERP provider and one from a best of breed provider, are we actually comparing like for like systems?
Yeah, so ultimately we are, but to use an old term, an ERP could be described as a jack of all trades, meaning it's trying to do everything for everyone in the business. And that can have advantages and disadvantages, as we've already covered. But the second half of that saying is that it's often better to have sort of having that better than a master of none, and by that we mean only having one product that works really well in the business. An ERP might be a better solution, but there is a real difference between ERP solutions and those solutions which are actually integrated best in breed, and that key difference is the level of functionality and the fact that the solution is a niche solution specifically for that business area.
So we all know that implementing new software comes at a price. How do ERP and best of breed software stack up when we look at this crucial criteria?
Okay, so we all know cost is king, and we've got to consider the cost of implementing the software because we've already mentioned how we might want to manage that implementation. So For best of breed, we're more likely to go with the big bang approach to leverage the maximum benefits for that particular business function. With ERP, big bang is going to be much more complicated, and the switch on can be after a number of years of investment to get to that point. So from a best in breed perspective, parallel runs are going to be much easier because we're probably only going to be parallel running one business function or process rather than the whole business. And parallel runs are critical to success. And in the associated white paper, which is available as a handout on this webinar, I looked at a particular organisation who were parallel running for 2 years on their new ERP solution. And for that whole 2-year period, the team members were dual keying the data. And unfortunately, that business went into administration, I'm sure not because of the ERP. But it's a real life example of the length of time and the level of investment that happens within an ERP parallel project. And clearly the length of that project will have an implication on the cost, because you're going to have more consultancy, more expenses to add in the longer that project takes. And a best of breed implementation tends to be more agile with much smaller milestones and sprints in the project. So we'd probably use a more agile project management method as well. And data migration and validation are going to be much simpler if we're focusing on one particular area of expertise. And that will also mean that we're using less people within the organisation to understand that data, because when we involve multiple business teams all at once, obviously that's also a resource implication in the organisation, because generally you want the people with the best level of understanding of each area involved in the project, and that takes them out of the day-to-day activity. And I just wanted to explain at this stage why I've put the pictures of the sock drawer on there as well. So it's something I've talked about before, and that's the cost of care versus the cost per wear. And the choice really with socks is, do I buy really expensive socks that would be high quality and last a long time, meaning that the cost per wear is extended over that long period? Or would I buy more pairs of cheaper socks that wouldn't last as long, but I know I can buy more of them for the same price as the expensive socks? So do I care more about the cost per wear, which is buy more of the cheaper, or the cost per care, which is the fact that I care about the fact I have a better solution? And in the case of HR systems, there is a strong case for both for investment, and both suggest that difficulty in the selection process. So I really recommend invest in the selection process itself. So get involved, take time, and think about the impact of that selection, and prepare well and involve objective views that look beyond just the gloss of the solution.
Okay, so when it comes to HR software, not your socks, do you care more about your cost per care or your cost per wear? Just give us a quick answer in our poll that's on your screen now. Be interesting to see which one you guys come out with. James, I feel like I ought to ask you how much you spend on your socks, but that might be going a little bit too far.
Yeah, I have a subscription service, funnily enough, for my socks. I get a pair sent every month, so I always get a new one, much to my fiance's delight.
Okay, so you're a cost per care kind of guy. That's
Definitely,
great.
yeah.
Cool. Looking at the poll results, it's a narrow margin, but it seems our audience agree with your sock subscription approach, with 63% saying it's a cost per care is the most important, but 38% of you, nice and honest, cost per wear, like that's totally understandable. And when budgets are tight, you know, you have to consider whether it's the time is right to invest upfront now, or perhaps save that for the future.
Yeah.
So we've had a good look through the different types of options that are available on the market, but it's time to make a decision which way to go in ERP or best of breed software. So how do we approach making that final decision for our organisation?
Okay, so yes, we need to consider the organisational context. I always say with any system selection project, context is key, and I encourage everybody to spend lots of time scoping and thinking about the organisation context. So hopefully after this session, when you get the recording, it might be worth revisiting this slide and just take a few minutes to sort of fill this chart in for yourselves. I've just picked out a few key things that you might want to consider. So in terms of sector, this is going to be really important because there might be niche systems that reflect your area of expertise. A quick example of that is between the public and private sector, there are very different pension requirements in terms of how we manage pensions and how we report pensions. Another key factor is in-house skills. If you've got a very tech proficient workforce, and you've started to recruit with technology already, so you've set that expectation from the outset, then you might want to ensure that your technology is always cutting edge, and so that you have regular systems investment. Budget is always one I'm going to mention because cost is key, as we've said. Knowing how much you've got to spend on this project is going to be critical, and factor in as well if you need to make any savings from this project, because ultimately it could be a cost reduction exercise to implement a new solution. Managed or outsourced services, just to pick another one, something else to consider when you're thinking about a new system. So it is a key time to consider if, for example, you could outsource part of the HR or payroll problem areas that you might have. And outsourcing isn't necessarily always more expensive, so it is something definitely to consider. And the final one I'll pick is thinking about the supplier. So think about who you'd want to work with, and then do your research on those suppliers and talk to their other customers as well to find out whether or not you are a good fit for them as an organisation.
Okay, so how does the project team go about identifying business requirements, particularly those that are essential and those that are just nice to fulfill?
Yeah, so as I said, context is key and requirements gathering is the first stage in that. So you're going to start off with your requirements gathering usually through workshops, and you'd have your various business stakeholders involved in that. You would engage stakeholders outside the remit of the systems. So we don't just want to have HR and payroll people sat in the room trying to put together the requirements for the HR and payroll system. We want to have the end users, some managers, some of the problematic areas in the organisation involved, and really try and understand the business challenges. And I would always say, ask yourself the question, what problem are we trying to solve by implementing this technology? And focus on the requirements and focus on the functionality. What do you need the system to do rather than what it needs to look like, first of all? What does it actually need to deliver for you? What business questions do you need to be able to answer from this solution? And we also want you to focus on what type of organisation you are and look at the detail of how well you want to interact with systems. Are you looking for human resource management systems? Or are you looking more for a people experience system with more of a social focus and social onboarding? And understanding that culture of your business is key in this area, because to try and shoehorn a people experience system into an organisation that already has solutions that deliver that is going to be really difficult. And another key area of focus is the digital strategy, and the IT heroes are going to be really important in this process. We want to make sure we've got the non-functional requirements as well as the functional requirements. So for example, if your IT strategy is that you only want cloud-hosted products, then there's no point in looking at suppliers that can't deliver to that. And think about the level of appetite and risk in the organisation, because with any change, there is always some risk. So what are your biggest watch points in terms of this project? And for a hint, with HR and payroll, usually we're going to be talking about holidays and pay, because it's the most emotive subjects for employees. And lastly, but probably most importantly, what's the appetite for data and analytics across the organisation? Where are you at in that digital HR maturity and people analytics maturity? And where do you want to get to? Are you happy with descripting reporting, which is all talking about the past? Or do you want to move more into predictive analytics and a system which helps you course correct if there are any potential problems on the horizon? So really do focus on what level of reporting analytics the solution can actually provide.
So what deployment options or considerations should we be thinking about when looking at purchasing new software?
Okay, so some jargon here, but I think it's important to understand, and I often say to HR professionals, don't ever sort of worry about asking questions about what this actually means. So in terms of hosting, hosting might be delivered on-premise, so you might host a solution yourself, or your supplier might host a solution for you. And you've got SaaS, which is providing the hosting and the licensing of the products. Cloud-based products, which are products accessible through web browsers or apps, and they usually have very little downtime on the cloud for maintenance. Updates are pushed out in real time, and users are made aware of them, a little bit like your iPhone or Android phone when it needs to do an update. Some solutions still require license purchasing. So if we think back to the days where we used to buy games for our PCs and you had to put the floppy disk in and install it, and then you had to put the license key from the back of the disk pack. I think Microsoft Office these days, that's a similar kind of thing where you have to download the application and then enter a license key and purchase that license. For some systems, back office users, and in particular in those involved in reporting, might have to have some kind of server visualization or a remote desktop. So if you, for example, are hosted by a supplier but want to be able to interrogate the database directly, you might then need to have access to the actual server that it sits on. And so that might be delivered through some kind of virtual server. And managed services might cover the hosting of the product and the maintenance of the infrastructure, but also hosting part of the functions. So outsourcing payroll, for example, to a solution provider who also hosts the products for you. API is the method of integration that pushes and pulls data between the systems. And when we're talking about features versus functions, I always ask people to consider when implementing new technology, what level of configuration is there versus customization. Configuration is a key difference to customization. Systems are configurable in that they allow you to add pictures, might change the color of some of the buttons, for example, or define how workflows actually work. Whereas customization is changing the core being of the product or the output files. And often that can lead to problems during upgrades or patch releases if it's not a cloud hosted product, where your level of customization then needs to be reset each time. So it's a key consideration.
So what are the most important factors we should be thinking about when we're making that absolute final purchasing decision?
Yeah, so context is key, and I can't stress this enough. Your personal context in terms of who you are as a business, where you want to go, and the history that you've had. And consider the size and scope of your project. And by that I mean, are you looking at a full transformational project for the whole organisation? Or are you looking at purchasing new HR and payroll solutions only? And there's a couple of quotes there from Voltaire. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think that's really important to stress, that it's going to be very rare that you would find an absolutely perfect system that delivers 100% of your business requirements and is affordable and something that you can implement easily. So maybe it's better to have a diamond with a flaw than a pebble without. And I think it's just something really important to focus on, because often we strive for perfection and we expect nothing less, but be realistic about the requirements that you have and whether you're going to be able to meet them all.
I think if we take that back to a consumer example that you had at the start, James, it's like thinking about purchasing a car. Is it checking off enough of your requirements, but maybe it might be the wrong shade of blue, but it does everything else you want, for example?
Absolutely.
Or if you're house hunting, you have a list of desirable factors, but you might have to compromise in some areas. It's just finding the right option for you, and the least painful compromise, I suppose, is the way I might look at purchasing a bit of software.
Absolutely.
So we're coming to the end now. Can you give us a quick recap of the key things that we need to take away from this presentation, James?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I say best practice does not exist, what I mean is, in terms of system selection, every project is going to be unique, and every project will have those unique factors to take into account. So you can't simply copy somebody else's project. You need to do that yourself. And that's why I say there is no right answer. There is probably a best fit for the organisation and a fit that is less of a best fit in terms of that compromise. And that's why I always suggest focus on implementation scoping, focus on understanding how the solution is going to be rolled out, what will happen when, and if that fits with your organisation's context. We've done a previous white paper on benchmarking together with Ciphr. And benchmarking your current technology is always really important when looking for new software. Understand, if you move to a new product, are you going to take across the same problems because the team's behavior isn't changed in terms of how they interact with systems? That's really critical. And challenge yourselves in terms of that behavior and how you could work better with your tech, but also challenge your providers in terms of, if they say something can't be delivered, ask where it is on the roadmap and if it will be available in future. And my final point here is commit. If you implement a new piece of technology, make a commitment to that technology, that you're going to invest in it, you're going to continuously develop it as you would with your people, and that you're going to continue to use the best features of the product. And I always say, make sure you have a development plan, don't just tinker with systems.
Okay, thanks so much, James. We've come to the Q&A portion of the broadcast now. So if you have any questions for James or queries, ideas that have been prompted by the content we've covered so far, send them in using the Q&A panel on your screen now, and we will do our best to answer them for you. I have a couple of questions that have sprung to mind, James. If an organisation has an ERP solution already, would they be stuck? Would they need to purchase another ERP to replace the current one, or is it possible to move from an ERP to a best of breed solution?
Yeah, it is absolutely possible. I think in terms of the decoupling conversation we had as part of this session, understanding which parts of the product are easier to switch off first than others is important, and really understand the context of why you need to move from one to the other. And as I said during the session, in terms of things like payroll, for example, just understand the implications on the other business areas, because you're going to be sort of the flagship department if you are the first to go and get that best of breed solution, but you're probably leaving behind a trail of destruction in terms of the way the system's been set up. So just understand from an engagement perspective that you will need to engage with those other teams to make sure that the decoupling project is one that's happening probably to a larger extent than the implementation experience.
When it comes to making the right decision about the right software for your organisation, what kind of skills or stakeholders might need to be involved in that process beyond the HR team?
Yeah, so it's a great question, really. So HR can often fall into a trap of thinking, well, we work in HR, so we know the HR solution. We are managers, so we represent the manager team, and we're employees of the business. But often I think it's fair to say HR can be our own worst customers in terms of our processes. So I would always involve IT in the process for those non-functional requirements. Finance are going to be a key partner, because ultimately they have the power over the money, I would imagine, and they also want that vested interest in terms of HR and payroll products for how that costing data is going to pass through into the finance solutions for accounting. And you also want to include your sort of operational business staff, and make sure that the frontline staff that are going to be using this product have some say in the purchase and feel like they own it from the outset. So the skill sets really are going to be around consulting, challenging, and probably a bit of business acumen as well in terms of understanding the direction and strategy of the business.
Something that some organisations might be concerned about is that moving from one system to another, or one type of system to another, might mean that they lose out on some of the things that they're comfortable with and they've developed internally already. So I'm thinking about, for organisations that are quite mature with their data analytics, is there a risk that they might lose access to some of that data or that capability by switching system providers?
I mean, potentially in terms of history, if there is no consideration for taking historical data over to the new solution, that could be a problem. But as I said, if we move into a best in breed approach, the systems might integrate with each other in real time anyway, or you could have that data warehouse that they integrate with. So there's no reason why you can't have all the historical data in the data warehouse and your real-time data for real-time reporting in your new solution. But if you need to do historical analytics, pull the two data sets together.
Okay. And we've kind of looked today at making the decision between an ERP or best of breed system. Is that decision something that an organisation would need to make before they meet with potential vendors, or can they make that after they've had some conversations with vendors whose software they think might be a fit for them?
I suppose it's a little bit chicken and egg, but I always recommend, and we did in the benchmarking session, go out there and have a look at what products are on offer, because writing your requirements list without knowing what products can actually do is going to be really difficult. So I recommend attending things like, when you can, trade shows, or download a brochure from a supplier, ask a supplier for a demo, and I'm sure you'll know, Catherine, suppliers are very happy to give demos to people who are really just starting that discovery journey, really, in terms of looking for HR and payroll solutions to showcase their products and what they can do, and often that would mean that you'd be included in the selection process later on. So definitely go out there and look at what's available before putting together your requirements, and do market engagement and market testing just to understand what a modern product actually looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking on Ciphr's behalf, we're always really happy to do, well, as it is at the moment, online meetings with people to showcase what our solutions can do, and understand how that they might fit with the challenges you're trying to address by by switching your HR software. And one final question, you've talked about there being the sort of no best practice or one size fits all, but is it worth getting advice or recommendations from fellow HR practitioners or comparable organisations, or is this a decision that employers really have to make for themselves?
So, I mean, as I said, invest in the selection process, and yes, definitely get in touch with HR friends and peers. Definitely something I would recommend in terms of looking at like-minded organisations and understanding what they have in place and what their systems map is, but also ask them about what challenges they have with that system and those system integrations as well, to understand if they have problems or if they do have that panacea of a perfect HR and payroll solution. So there is always organizational context to take into account, and there are specialist providers that will help you with that system selection process and the procurement process. But there are lots of tools available in terms of just understanding what the shortlist might be. But as part of your due diligence process, you're always going to ask your supplier for a list of customers that they're happy for you to contact to get a reference from as well, and to see how they use the product. And that's likely to include the flagship customer, but also ask them for some customers who implemented a number of years ago, so that you can see what happens through the duration of the life cycle of that product.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, James. Just before we go today, we're going to share a few resources with you that you might find useful. James mentioned that he's written a white paper on the same subject for us, which I had hoped would be available in the webinar control panel, but it is sadly not there. So if you would like me to email you a copy of that white paper after the broadcast, in the questions box, just type white paper and I will record your email address and I'll make sure that gets sent to you. So that white paper covers the differences between ERP and best of breed solutions and goes into a bit more depth about the selection process between them. We have some additional resources from Ciphr, 2 further papers, one about choosing the right HR software and one looking at how to benchmark HR software. You can access those either by scanning the QR code on your screen now or by typing the short link into a browser. Don't worry, you will get this recording tomorrow, so if you haven't had time to note these down now, don't panic, you can review this at your leisure tomorrow. And phase 3 also have some resources they've put together, 12 steps to people technology success and the HR and payroll system benchmarking tool. Again, you can access those either by scanning the QR code or by visiting the short link, or just heading over to phase 3's website. You can find them fairly easily from there. So it just remains to say thank you very much, James, for sharing your expertise today, and thank you to our audience for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about Ciphr's solutions or phase 3's expertise, just fill in the exit survey that you'll see when this broadcast ends and we'll be in touch with you. That survey will also ask you for a bit of feedback about today's broadcast. So if you're able to give us your views, that will really help us improve our future broadcasts. Our next webinar is on Tuesday, the 29th of September. Experts from Ciphr's payroll team and our partners Web Expenses will be discussing how technology can help HR, payroll and finance teams work together in greater harmony. So if your teams are currently operating separately, you won't want to miss that one. Just register using the short link on your screen, which is bit.ly/finance and HR tech. We hope you can join us then. Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a great day. Goodbye.